How connected to your food are you? Today on the Harvest Your Health podcast, we're going to take the test together. And so I've been putting a lot of thought into this, and I felt like after a few weeks of hitting topics that were much more serious, that we need to step back and take a bit more of a have a lighthearted conversation today. And what I'm going to do is take you through 10 questions, take you through the test of figuring out if you're connected with food. Now, I thought to make this a bit more intriguing, I'd come up with a little scale here of exactly maybe where you fall as you score yourself so you can know how you are in your own personal journey of being connected to food. Now, before I give you that scale, I want to point out why it is important to be connected to food. That may seem like an obvious question with an obvious answer, but when you look around, you'll find that many individuals are not connected to their food, and there's a lot of health consequences that come along with that, and beyond even health consequences. So we're going to figure out whether you're connected to food, and if you are, then hey, great job out there, but if you're not, this will give you some goals to shoot for and maybe give you some direction. Now, not an inclusive list, but these are just some fun questions I came up with that I thought we could all maybe learn from. So here's the scale. From 0 to 3, if you score from 0 to 3 on these 10 questions, ooh, guys, I'm going to label you a food flunky. We've got a lot of room to improve here and definitely can do better. But we all have to have a starting point, right? Now, up from there, if you score 4 to 5, you're going to be a food fledgling. So what that means is that you're starting to take some action in the right direction, but you just haven't got quite the momentum behind you yet. But hey, you're doing a good job of getting those first steps going. Up from there, we're going to have 6 to 7. I'm going to call you guys a nourishment novice. And so you're starting to really appreciate the value that good, healthy, quality food brings. And before long, you'll be on up to around an 8, 9, and a 10. But what if you score an 8, 9? Well, if you're an 8, 9, you're going to be a proprietor of nutrient knowledge. So you've been doing this for a little bit, you've started to acquire some knowledge, and from that knowledge, you're making better, consistent choices around your food, and you've really started to develop a bond with it and begin to incorporate decisions into your life that are helping you make the best choices around food. And then at number 10, if you score positive on all 10 of these, guys, I'm going to call you a food rebel because you are breaking the mold. You are not the norm. So I hope each and every one of you lands there, but if not, you'll certainly get there in time. All right, without further ado, let's jump in to these 10 questions to determine where you fit on the scale of having a relationship with food and being connected to your food. So right at the top of the list, we're going to have, can you cut a chicken? Now, many of you have probably never really given much thought to this. You go to the store, you buy chicken breasts, you buy maybe chicken thighs, maybe some drumsticks, but what if you bought the whole chicken? Would you know what to do with that whole chicken to take it and to break it down into those individual parts? You might not, and I was really surprised by this. And just to be transparent here, this was something that I had to learn myself, right? So we all have to have our starting points at some stage in life. But I was really surprised how many individuals much rather, when we sell different chicken cuts from the ranch, many individuals much rather have cuts of chicken than the whole chicken. But being able to cut a whole chicken is not that difficult, actually. In fact, I shot a YouTube video about that if you're just really interested in learning how. But this gives you an opportunity to make more use out of the same amount of food that you might get. So instead of just ordering or just purchasing breasts or just purchasing thighs, you're getting all the other aspects, all the other components of the chicken, the backs, the drumsticks, and you can do a lot more with those. For example, if you want more cartilage, collagen is actually a big topic out there today. If you want more collagen in your diet, well, from the drumsticks and from the thighs and from the wings, you can get that just nibbling on that collagen on the ends of those bones, but you're not going to get that from a chicken breast, right? But it's real simple to be able to do. This conversation really came to mind. What made me think about this is I was in one of my colleagues' office a few weeks ago getting an adjustment, And as I was sitting there having a conversation with him, he had recently purchased a whole chicken from the ranch, and he made mention, he said, you know what, we're going to be buying whole chickens from you. He said, I had never cut up a chicken before, and I realized after doing it the first time that it was really not that difficult, and there's much more value in a whole chicken for the consumer. So that's my first question for you is, can you cut up a whole chicken? And here's the other thing about that is that if you can do that, then you can do a turkey, you can do any other poultry the same way because they're all pretty much similar. So that's the first question there. Makes it easier to know your meat and to be able to have that relationship with it. So that's number one. Number two is, this is going a different direction. So for those of you that said, well, I don't eat a lot of meat in my diet. Hey, no worries. Then let's talk plants here for a minute. And my question for you is, number two is, and make sure you keep score for yourself, is can you grow a radish or a squash? And if you've even attempted this and failed, that's fine. But just, did you attempt it? And hopefully you were successful in doing it. Now, why did I pick a radish and a squash? Well, radish and squash are by far two of the easiest plants to be able to grow. You can just literally pull some dirt back, drop a few radish seeds in there, and before long, couple of weeks, you're going to have radish that are coming, breaking the ground that you're going to be able to pick and be able to eat. And squash, my goodness, guys, if you can get a squash to grow, I laugh around the ranch sometimes. We'll walk around, like literally I can think outside of our chicken brooder right now, there's a squash plant growing out there. I have no idea where the seeds for that came from because we don't feed the young meat chickens, we don't feed them squash. And unless it came from just us throwing out our compost, like adding to our compost around there at some point, that's about all I can think of. But the point is that if you can get a squash seed in the ground, that squash is probably going to come up as long as it gets a little bit of water on it and has some sunlight. And my goodness, are squash so prolific once they get going. Your zucchini squash, your yellow squash, your crookneck squash, all these guys, they just take off and go. And so if you've attempted to grow a radish or a squash or any other plant, right, any other vegetable, you've attempted that and you've been successful with that, or even if you haven't, you just attempted it and you were making an effort to try to grow your own food and thinking beyond just going to the grocery store, hey, that deserves a point. Add that one to your list. All right, so that's the second question. What about number three here? This one actually came up this morning. I was having a conversation with someone about saturated fats and incorporating in more saturated fats into their diet because they just had been avoiding those as a part of their diet. Not exclusively, but they had kept those out within reasonable quantities. And they asked me, he said, hey, what would be some good saturated fat sources that I can bring back into my diet? Butter, ghee, tallow. Ooh, what's tallow? Was what they asked me. And I said, hey, this is just the renderings from fat. This is your fat renderings from your ruminant animal. So for example, you can have beef tallow or bison tallow. When I shoot deer, we keep the bones back. My wife makes venison tallow out of those. And so any of these ruminant animals, these foraging animals like that, you can use their bones to ultimately make tallow and use that tallow like the top of the broth. When the bone broth is made, the fats that are on the top of that, if you're into doing any of this yourself, that's going to be tallow. So the point on this is that if you know what tallow is, you are far ahead of the majority of the population out there. Many people don't know what tallow, what it is, where it comes from, and it's an excellent source of fat. Doesn't have much of a taste to it and does a great job if you need to use a high heat or cook something at a high heat. That's a great option. And so tallow is the third question. If you knew what tallow was, doesn't matter if you get it from beef, venison, bison, any other elk, any other ruminant animal, hey, give yourself a plus on this one. You got a positive on this question. Now, here's the next one. Do you know local farmers and do you try to buy food without labels? And I think this is a key question, and this one's probably a bit more obvious, but I think it's such a critical question to ask because if you know who your local farmers are, you have a general idea of what they're producing, You have probably, if you've been interacting with them over any period of time, you developed a relationship there, and right, we're trying to connect with food. We're trying to develop a food relationship here. We're testing our relationship to food because we need to ultimately have that. That's what gives us our nourishment, our vitality, what we are each and every day. And if you know that individual that's supplying your food or that you're buying from, you've developed a relationship with them. So here's the key part of this, is that there's some transparency there. And when you have transparency, you can trust in what you're buying. Now, that also means that if you're buying from these sources and you're not just thinking, I need this, whatever this is, whatever food that is, I need this, and I'm just going to run to the local grocery store and grab that. If instead what you're doing is you're cultivating that relationship with that local producer, whether that's the farmer, the rancher, whether we're talking meats or vegetables, whatever that is, and you're buying these foods without labels, then guys, you are so far ahead. You're not beholden to the conventional model of food supply, and you're also not at risk for when that food supply runs into a period of crisis like we've seen before. So this gives you an opportunity to think outside of the box, and also you probably will have a consistency of supply maybe when others don't. So this is a good, I think, for thinking beyond just nourishment and thinking in terms of availability. This can be a good way to know if you're connected to your food, is do you know people around you that are producing your food? Okay, now here's one. That was question 4, so score yourself on that one. But let's go into question 5, and I'm going to take you back to when I was in college. And actually when I was in graduate school. So one of the things that I would get up every morning and do, and usually I would start to do this the night before, is I would prepare my lunch for the next day. And I never really cared that much about eating in the cafeteria. So I would pack my lunch, put it in the refrigerator, and then when I got up and headed out the door to school in the morning, headed to my classes, what I had prepared, I would put it in my cooler, and I would take that with me, and when lunchtime came around, I would eat that. And as I was going through graduate school, I towards the end of my graduate education, I got into bodybuilding. One of my instructors happened to be into that, natural bodybuilding, and I enjoyed working out. So I thought, you know what, I was young, wanted to test my skills, and thought, this will be fun. Let me do this for a little bit. But anybody that has ever really gotten into that level of exercise and trying to reach that level of physique realizes that you have to be on a pretty regimented schedule of eating and food consumption. And so I got into this habit of keeping a cooler with me all the time. I was eating by the clock. When it was 7 o'clock in the morning, I was eating. When it was 10 o'clock, I was eating. It was very, very regimented for this. And that has carried over, so go well past that now, and I've graduated, I'm traveling back and forth between Texas and being out of state, and I carry a cooler with me. And even now, when I'm going somewhere, if I'm going to be gone for a day or two, or if I'm traveling like tomorrow, for example, I'm going to be taking chickens to the processor, I will have a cooler with me to ensure that the food that I'm eating is what we've produced, what we know, we trust, what we've grown, and I don't get caught in a situation where I'm at the mercy of trying to consume something that I really don't want to eat. So the question here is, do you carry a cooler with you with your food? And some of you may go, well, I would never do that. But others of you are probably listening to this and going, yep, that's me. I do that. And some people would think, well, that's just embarrassing. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be judged for carrying a cooler around, or I don't want people to say something about me. Who cares, right? It's your health. Carry your cooler, carry the food you enjoy eating, carry the food with you that you trust. But the question here is, if you carry the cooler to ensure that you're getting the quality of food that you're looking for, then hey, that's great. Right? You're probably a big step ahead of most people when it comes to their diet that aren't willing to do that. So be willing to get the funny look, to step outside of the box, and what you'll see after a while is that you're not the one getting the funny look anymore. People will start adopting what you're doing over time that are in your circle. Okay, so hey guys, we are at the halfway point here. So how are you scoring so far? Are you moving? Are you making gathering points with each one of these questions because these are things that you're doing? Or are you starting to get to the point where you're getting a little antsy because you haven't scored anything yet? Well, don't worry, I've got 5 more questions for you here that are going to give you an excellent opportunity to continue to score some points here. All right, so now we move into number 6. And number 6 is, do you have a food routine or do you just eat randomly? And if you have a food routine, you're more connected to your food as opposed to just randomly eating. And the reason I suggest this is that when you have a food routine, you can better stay in tune with your body and how food responds in your body, or how you respond, your body's responding to various foods. And you can know how to adjust your diet based on how your body responds. Do I eat more protein? Do I eat more carbohydrates? Have I been more active? Maybe I need to increase more my food intake based on what my activity level has been. So these are all things that when you have a food routine, a routine schedule of eating, and it doesn't mean that you have to be hard and fast. It doesn't mean that you eat every meal, every dinner needs to be served at 5:30 every day. No, there can be flexibility in there, guys. Maybe some days you're at 5:30, some days you're at 7:30, right? I mean, that's just life. But when you're just missing meals or avoiding meals, you don't have the same connectivity with food. Now, this doesn't mean that you just need to be grazing and eating endlessly. It doesn't mean that. But if I'm eating a consistent breakfast, lunch, dinner, and I'm doing it with some type of inherent schedule, then I know what my food options are going to be. I'm not just letting myself get hungry and randomly grab something. I'm being preemptive in my thought that is going into that food that's going to come next, because I know within, say a couple of hours that I'm going to be eating, and I want to have some degree of preparation that's going to go into that food that I'm going to be consuming. And so you tend to be a much better preparer of food, meaning that you're mentally prepared with your food. You're going out of your way to make better choices when you have a routine versus if you're just flying by the seat of your pants. So if you're flying by the seat of your pants, you don't get a point on this one. But if you have more of a consistent routine with your food consumption, you deserve a point on this question. Now, that was number 6. Let's move over here to number 7. And number 7 is, would you rather fast or eat unhealthy foods? And this may seem like an ironic question to be asking, given that I just talked about having a food routine. I was invited up to a 3-day conference up in Dallas 2 years ago now. And I went up there and I packed my cooler, but I didn't want to pack for this particular event because I was going to be traveling back and forth between the event venue and the hotel. And I didn't want to have to pack a massive cooler to take with me on this particular trip, but I did pack on the way up there. And when I got up there on a Thursday evening, late Thursday afternoon, and I had my last meal. And I knew that between bouncing back and forth between the hotel and the event center and being at the event, and there wouldn't be good options at the event, that I wasn't going to have the opportunity to eat the kind of foods that I wanted to eat. And at this point, it had been quite a long time since I had done a multiple day fast. Now, I don't tend to be a faster, but every now and again, I'll randomly do one just off the cuff, not anything with any type of consistency or periodic nature to it. But that was the last time I ate, was on a Thursday evening. I didn't eat Friday. I didn't eat Saturday. Drove home Saturday night, and Sunday morning was when I had my first meal. But in my mind, I knew that if I wanted to avoid consuming foods that were not going to be consistent with my normal diet, if I didn't want to run the risk of potentially, it's a lot easier to consume a food pathogen when you're not controlling your own food preparation and things like that. So I didn't want to take that risk. And like I said, I hadn't fasted in quite some time at that point. So I thought, you know what, let's do this. Let me go ahead and fast as opposed to eating unhealthy foods. So my question to you is, Are you an individual who had rather fast for a period of time, not necessarily days, but maybe you just missed a meal, maybe you missed 2 meals. Had you rather fast as opposed to eating unhealthy food? And if the answer to that is yes, you get a point. If the answer to that is no, well, we're going to move on to the next question, and hopefully there's opportunity for you there. All right, so this leads us to question 8. And here's my question for you on this. This comes down to the mental thought process around food and just simply asking, do you think about food? Now, let me caveat this for a minute and say not obsess about food, right? Not that you think about food 24/7 or during your waking hours. That's not where this question is going. This question is more about if you have food sitting in front of you or you have an opportunity to make a food choice, are you connected enough to your food to look at that food and say, I know if I make this choice, this is the health impact that's going to occur? Or am I making choices that are consistent towards long-term building and development of my health? And if that is more of you, then you're going to get a point on this. You see, we should be giving thought to our food. We shouldn't just look at food as a way to stave off the hunger or to try to reach satiety. That's not the intention of food. Food is something that has historically changed the way that we function. It's something that we sought out. We had a very strong relationship with it because when there's limited of food, unlike now where we have just unlimited availability, but when you have limited food, you're giving much more thought to where that food is coming from, how that food is nourishing your body. And we should still adopt that same type of mentality where we think about food, again, not obsessing about it, but we think about food and we do it in a way where we're looking at how does that thought process optimize our health? Like, what is it that I'm going to choose amongst these options? It's going to give me the most bang for the buck that is going to make me feel better. When I wake up tomorrow, I'm going to feel more energetic because of the food choices that I had the day prior, as opposed to I made poor choices with my diet, and now I wake up the next morning and I feel like I've been out drinking and I'm hungover, when if I'd have just made some better choices about what I was ingesting, I wouldn't feel this way, right? And so if you are an individual who gives thought to your food, gives thought to what you're going to be eating, what the impact is going to be on your health, give yourself a point here. If that's not you, what I would suggest is don't look at this as, oh, I missed my point, right? Or I didn't score here and I'm doing bad with this. No, that's not the case. This is just really more about trying to give you some direction of how to give thought to things, how to give thought to your food, to actually put some intention behind it and not just look at it as sustenance that I have to ingest or that's an inconvenience to something I'm trying to get done. Look at it as if I ingest this food, it's an optimal food for me to be consuming. It's going to make me a more productive, mentally sharp individual, and that's what I'm after. Okay, so that gets us all the way to 8, guys. So we're getting close to the end here. So let's look at question 9. And question 9 is, do you avoid counting calories, carbs, and fat? And do you ignore fad diets? So I'm putting all these together because fad diets tend to be hyper-focused on one macronutrient or the inclusion of a macronutrient or the avoidance of a macronutrient. And so when I say macronutrients, that term is specifically referring to the fats, the proteins, the carbohydrates. And it's a lot of energy to give thought into how many carbohydrates am I consuming every day, or how many calories am I consuming every day, or how much fat did I get, or did I reach my fiber quota for today, right? And if that's you and you're just tired of doing that, well, thankfully I have great news for you in that there is a better way to go about doing this, which is just to eat high quality nutrient dense food, and the calories, the fat, all that stuff takes care of itself because metabolically you'll be a more fine-tuned individual as opposed to having a broken metabolism where you can't efficiently use those foods that you're taking in. And if you're making poor choices, you're only amplifying it and making the scenario worse. So again, here's where you're going to score yourself on this is, do you avoid counting calories, carbs, and fats, and also ignore fad diets? I'm always kind of, anytime you hear these fad diets come around, it's a cycle, right? It's someone tries these things and maybe they benefit for a little bit and then they backlash, they rebound back to where they were. And that is no way to live. That is definitely not, if our interest and intention here is to connect with food, that is in no way whatsoever connecting you with food. Connect with the food and don't get so into the weeds with the food that you really lose the big picture of what you're trying to do. When you're just looking at food as a calorie, and this is such an important point, when you're only looking at food as a calorie, you're missing the picture of what that food can actually do for you. You're overlooking the value that that food can bring to your health, how that can affect how you feel just the very next day. If you're counting carbs or fat, right, there's a place for that kind of stuff. But if your goal is just simply optimal health and you don't have extremely specific athletic goals that you're trying to achieve, then you don't need to get into the weeds on that stuff. You can stay much more superficial and just make good quality choices on your food, good nutrient-dense food sources. Nutrient dense is what we're after here, and save yourself so much headache. Would you not love to have back that mental time, that energy, that mental energy that you've invested in thinking about how many calories or how many grams of carbohydrates can I have, or oh, I'm depriving myself from these carbohydrates, and dealing with all that mental anguish that you're sitting there mentally torturing yourself about not being able to consume those things, when if you just were consistently consuming good nutrient-rich food that had life associated with it, you wouldn't have all this mental anguish. So if you have been a person that avoids that type of thought process, you get a point, guys. If you're a person that has been engaging in that process, listen, I can appreciate where you've been, but I have to tell you, there's such a better way to live and not be constrained by all these parameters that we hear about carbs and fats and calories and all these things. Common sense, guys. Common sense application of food is what matters. It doesn't mean that calories and fats and carbohydrates never come into the conversation. They do matter. But if your goal is just optimal health, then don't get lost in the details of those things. All right. So score yourself on that one. All right, guys, we have made it all the way to number 10. So number 10 is going to enter into the social context of being connected with food. So I've talked about your connection to food, but part of your connection to food is the connection that you have with others around your food. See, when you sit down and you share a meal with someone, you guys are sharing a like substance. You guys are sharing the same environment, the same space. There's energy amongst you that is being shared there. And so, and that's not to get off into the weeds and get esoteric on this, but there's just that energy of that individual that's vibrating with you, that you're reciprocating back and forth. You're having some conversation. You're feeding off of their energy and vice versa. And that all came about because of the food that you guys sat down to enjoy together. So whether that means sitting down with a family member or your family at night, your wife and kids, or husband and kids, or whether that means sitting down with someone in your extended family or a business associate and you're sharing that energy with them, whatever that looks like. But when you eat food with others, that is also a way of being connected, especially when you look at, let's say that you prepared that meal and you want to share that meal with someone else. When you prepared that meal, you've put your energy and intensity into that meal. You've made selections that are of high quality because you want the person that you're serving that to be able to enjoy that. And so that gives you an idea of how you can look at being connected to food, but also intertwine in that social aspect to it. So the 10th question here was, do you eat food with others? If you do that the majority of the time, give yourself a point. If you don't do that, look for opportunities to do that. There's different ways you can go about doing that. So hopefully, guys, after looking through this or listening to this and you and I talking about these different ways to know if you're connected to your food, hopefully you can look at this and can give yourself a pat on the back. But if not, don't worry about that. That's okay. These are just ideas of maybe areas that you can evolve into, areas that you can start striving to be able to accomplish these things. You can start looking for resources in your area, different ways to think about food, right? It's just even sitting down. Like if you literally got nothing else from what you and I have talked about here today, if you just sit down and give more intentional thought to your food, where it's coming from, what's behind it, is there transparency there? Was this food raised and grown with care and intention? If you just give that kind of thought to it, inherently you're going to become more in tune with the food that you're consuming. And as a byproduct of that, you'll start making and hopefully continue to make better, more informed choices that are ultimately going to continue to help optimize your health. So with all of that being said, score yourself, see where you're at, know what your next action plan needs to be, and from there, you can go out and harvest your health. Until next time, guys, we'll talk soon. Take care.